I am proud to present another Southerner. Because these Southerners are fighting leaders for the red, white, and blue. Now, Mary Dawson Cain is another one of these Southerners who believes in freedom under God for the individual. And in going back, I almost said, to the Constitution, we have to do something about the recent rulings of the Supreme Court, and we're going to go back to the basic principles of the Constitution to preserve our freedom. And she's going to tell you of a way that this can be done very easily and very effectively if we'll all get busy. Now, Mary Cain, that's Mrs. John L. Cain, incidentally. Her husband is a fine man, but it takes one of them to make a living, and she runs a newspaper and runs around the country and makes these speeches, and he does his part by making a living there in Summit, Mississippi. Mrs. Cain, Mary Cain, ran twice for governor of Mississippi. She was the first woman to run for that office. She placed 5th in a field of 8 men. She's past president of the Mississippi Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs. She's past president of the Mississippi Federation of Press Women and past regional president of National Federation of Press Women and past chairman of the Congress of Freedom. She's been at the top among the directors of Orfit and of We the People. She's state president of the Mississippi Women for Constitutional Government. She's editor of the Summit Sun at Summit, Mississippi. At the time when they ruled that we self-employed must pay Social Security, she refused to do so, even though she'd been paying Social Security on her employees there in the newspaper. They came and put a padlock on her front door in the newspaper to put her out of business. You know what she did? She went over to a filling station, got a hacksaw, and sawed it off. I met her 12 years ago when she called a meeting along with the Honorable Congressman Ralph Gwynn from New York, and at that time they heard about this, and people were saying, well, maybe it wasn't that late that this had happened, but anyway, after she sawed off the lock, they wanted to call her Hacksaw Mary, and most, she says that some of them still do, but most of them resented that. She's too lovely a Southern belle to be given such a name. The Honorable Mary Cain.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. It's been a long time, since last November. I came to the other rally, and it was such a joy to be here. Some of your faces are familiar to me. And then, of course, I had the wonderful privilege of speaking many years ago in Faneuil Hall with Dan Smoot and Dr. Merrill Root and a number of other wonderful, outstanding Americans. That was a high point in the life of Mary Cain. I have never forgotten it. And if Colonel Bunker is right, and there are very few conservatives in this area, I can only say that I am amazed, because you are on holy ground where the Boston Tea Party was launched. I want to ask you a question. Don't you feel sorry for me following Dan Smoot?
Not a bit.
Honestly, that man is like listening to music. That golden tongue and that marvelous mind. I tell you, I prayed for the right words. And then I get here, I think that he's going to speak about the invisible government. I get up to make my speech and discover that he has made practically my whole speech. Because it was my privilege to speak about constitutional government today. I want to show you how it is being violated and what we can do to remedy this horrible situation. The other day, I'm sure that your papers probably carried the same thing that mine did. this much space, which said, signs debt bill. President Johnson Monday signed legislation raising the temporary debt limit to a record-breaking $324 billion. That's all there was on the subject. Now, I want to show you one reason why we are having to raise the debt ceiling. Harry, would you help me hold this?
Sure.
Do you see this? The organization of federal executive departments and agencies. Now, this is right out of the horse's mouth. You may order a copy for 20 cents from the Superintendent of Documents, the U.S. Government Printing Office at Washington, D.C. If you'd like this monstrosity to put on your walls, you could almost pay for your room with a few of them. Clayton Rand, our own inimitable wit of Mississippi, wrote recently, R.L. Smidley, my New Jersey correspondent and co-author of The World Is Mine, has mailed a letter in longhand written to him October 28, 1922, from W.L. Westerman, professor of ancient history at Cornell University. The following paragraph from this letter is most timely. Quote, "It will not surprise you," said Dr. Westerman, "to know that my historical studies have developed in me considerable suspicion of governmental control of capitalistic enterprise. It seems inevitable to develop into something which is heavily and oppressively bureaucratic and mechanically unintelligent." Close quote. The 42 years which have followed the penning of these lines, said Clayton, give ample proof of justification for his suspicions. No one could have dreamed in 1922 that we would have the kind of government we have in 1964. If this change had come abruptly, it would have been a major revolution. But the change has been so gradual, there was no violent shock. It was Franklin D. Roosevelt, one of the architects of this bureaucracy, who planned it that way, who once said evolution and revolution are the same thing. I wish some professor of modern history would answer me this. If we move on for the next 32 years in the same direction we have been traveling in the past 32, how far shall we have then crept into socialism or crawled into communism? There is such a thing, concluded Clayton, as a country going to hell so gradually that nobody feels the heat until they're on fire. That, it seems to me, is precisely what we are doing in this country. We've been going so slowly that now we are on fire. Nobody even felt the heat. We have been divided in order to conquer us. We have been bought by degrees. Now, Dan Smoot did a marvelous job of summarizing all the high points of our wonderful history except one. He left out my favorite man. And before I get started with the Liberty Amendment, I'm going to give you the man who has been my inspiration to fight for liberty. And that is this man, Patrick Henry. Because I am firmly convinced that we would not even have a United States of America today had it not been for Patrick Henry. And I'm not saying that it was his speech, "Give me liberty or give me death," which gave us the revolution. It was something he said long before that. Patrick Henry was the one who stood there listening to what these people had said. You remember he had fought against the Stamp Act, and through his wonderful efforts, it was repealed 4 months after it was supposed to have gone into effect. And that day, he made that wonderful statement which has come down to us through the years. Our children repeat it like little parrots today. I wonder if they know the moral courage that it took for this young man, just 29 years old, on May 29th. He had been seated in the House only 6 days earlier, and yet there he was, daring to stand up before the people and tell them what he thought of the Stamp Act. And he said, Caesar had his Brutus, Charles first his Cromwell, and George third. And there the Speaker of the House cried out, "Treason! Treason!" All over the room the cry was taken up. Treason! We were loyal subjects of the British Crown. My pet biographer says he went right on and he said, and George III may profit by their example. And then he turned to the Speaker of the House, and they say his blue eyes were literally flashing fire as he said, "If this be treason, make the most of it." There are people in this country today who tell us that we are guilty of treason because we want to get rid of this bureaucratic monstrosity that I showed you a moment ago. Well, I say to them too, if this be treason, make the most of it, because I shall fight until I die. Yes, the Declaration of Independence is what we celebrate today. And yet it's a sad moment in American history when we realize that the Constitution has been completely bypassed by the civil rights legislation in Washington today. Now, what we can do about it, I do not know. I cannot foresee. Many of you have asked me, what of the 3 missing people in Mississippi? I frankly do not know. I do know that they had demanded federal protection, and when that protection was not forthcoming, I believe, I cannot help believing that they manufactured a means to get federal people in the state. Yes, the Declaration of Independence. We need a new Declaration of Independence. A declaration that will say flatly and forthrightly, we are opposed to giving up our independence to this form of subsidy and dependence upon government. But too many of our people in this nation today are dependent upon the federal government for the very bread that they eat. I have an aunt in Louisiana who would much prefer to be on the welfare program than to have her 3 sons who are perfectly able to take care of her do it, simply because she doesn't want to be a burden to her children. God forgive us when we let our parents feel that they are a burden to us. They cared for us when we were little and helpless. And by the same token, when they are old, it is our privilege, it is our priceless, precious responsibility to do the same for them. And God help us if we don't. Yes, I say Patrick Henry gave us this country because he had listened that day in St. John's Church in Virginia to all that the people had said. And when they had finished, he said, "Gentlemen, there's nothing we can do but fight." And you'd have thought he'd turned a hornet's nest loose. Fight? Why, Pat, you ought to have your head examined, I suppose they'd have said if they lived today. A little handful of 13 colonies, you think we can go up against England, the most powerful nation in the world? Did sound silly, didn't it? But he reminded them of what Dan told you. He said there is a just God who rules the destinies of nations, and he will help us. And then he went on, and this is the question which I think sparked the revolution. He said, when will we be any stronger? Will it be when there's a British Guard in every household? There are people who tell me, "Mary, what in the world do you think you can do going around the country talking about the Liberty Amendment? You tell us that there are 707 federal corporations competing with private enterprise. What do you think you can do about it? What do you think you can do about the untold thousands of bureaus in Washington? All of them, the product of the bureaucratic mind." I don't know what I can do. I only know that there was a little poem not long ago in our Sunday school lesson which I want to pass on to you. And if you ever get discouraged, I want you to think of this. "Master, where shall I work today?" And my love flowed warm and free. Then he pointed out a tiny place and said, "Tend that for me." I cried, "Oh no, not over there. Why, no one would ever see. No matter how well my work was done, not that little place for me." When the Lord spoke, he was not harsh. He answered me tenderly. "Tell me, precious child, are you working for them or for me?" Nazareth was just a little place, and so was Galilee. I think that we lose sight of that fact. We are looking for the big things to do. We have small chores to do, each in our own field, and let us get to the task. Now, friends, this is the task as I see it. And I see it just as clearly as did Patrick Henry that day, when he went on to say, "What is it you gentlemen wish? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be bought at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God! I care not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." I see only one way to be free, and that is through adoption of what we have come to call the Liberty Amendment. Now, many of you people remember this was started as the proposed 23rd Amendment. And then when they gave Washington the right to participate in voting, then that became the 23rd Amendment. So we decided that heaven knew when we'd ever get it through. After all, we've been working on this thing for so many years, and only 7 states so far have embraced it. It's a slow process. That was the way our founding fathers intended constitutional amendments. And that is one reason we resent so much this usurpation of power by the federal government. They have not done it by the amendatory process. They have simply usurped power. They have taken power. Actually, the Liberty Amendment does not add one thing to the Constitution. It does not take away one thing. It merely reinforces the meaning of our founding fathers. Now, Harry referred to the fact that in the preamble to our Constitution, the word is promote. But in Section 8, Article 1, Section 8, the word is provide. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the commonwealth of defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Now, if you are familiar with your Constitution, and I hope all of you are, may I see a showing of hands? How many of you have in your home a copy of the Constitution? That's a marvelous showing. It would astonish you to know that many times when I speak, not a single hand goes up. And yet, second to the Bible, this is the document which we should cherish most, which we should study and try to understand. It is not hard to understand. We have access to the writings of our founding fathers. Now, when Harry gave you that a few moments ago, and he gave the word promote, we come to the liberals who use the word provide. And they try to maintain that this is the key word, that they must provide for the general welfare of the nation. On the contrary, if you will read the Federalist Papers, you will discover that James Madison said flatly, the general welfare means the welfare of the entire nation as a whole. It does not mean the welfare of this little group or that little group or the other little group. The welfare of the entire nation. Now the liberals profess to take Thomas Jefferson as their God, and they say, well, Thomas Jefferson violated this creed because, after all, wasn't it he who made the Louisiana Purchase without sanction of the Congress? Listen, Thomas Jefferson squirmed from the day that he made the purchase. It was done hurriedly, hastily, and of necessity. He got it done. And he continued to think that he was wrong in doing it without the sanction of Congress. And yet, if ever an act was for the welfare of the entire nation as a whole, the Louisiana Purchase would certainly fit that pattern. Because this was something that affected the welfare of the entire nation. I make no apology for Thomas Jefferson on this score, and I resent the liberals who tried to sell him down the river on this score. Now, as you are aware, Mississippi became the 7th state to endorse the Liberty Amendment. We had a battle. I would like to tell you a little bit about that, but my time is so short here. But I will tell you this, that I took the Liberty Amendment brochure, which the New York Committee for Economic Freedom had sent out, and I made reprints of it, and I published it in the Summit Sun, and then I published extra copies. And my Women for Constitutional Government in Mississippi went to the legislature and they literally plastered the place with those things. So some of the liberals, 2 of them, got hold of some of it and they said this was trash. Now they had, because we said that it was a clear-cut issue between constitutional government and mobocracy or communism. And they were furious about it. And they said it was trash. It didn't even have a name on it. It just had the Mississippi Committee for Economic Freedom. Well, I hurried to take credit for it because I was very proud of that piece of trash which I had stolen from New York. And so after the thing was over and we had won, one of these liberals wrote a very nasty letter and sent a copy of it to the Clarion Ledger. And it was addressed to me, and he said, Mrs. Cain, I notice that you're getting a sewer system in Summit. If the Liberty Amendment goes through, how would you account for the fact that $220,000 just wouldn't be there? Well, I sent him a copy of the papers in which I had fought the use of federal money for my sewer system in my town of Summit. I don't have to apologize for my stand. I never go down the line with the federal money. If they want federal money, they have to do it over my body, because I always state exactly where I stand, and I had done so. So I sent him those statements. Well, another man came to my rescue, a man in Jackson, and he wrote a very gracious letter, and he reminded the gentleman that if the Liberty Amendment was in effect, the states would have the money at home, the people would have the money, and they wouldn't have to borrow from the federal government. So you see, we are not without friends. Now, out on the table, you will find some copies of a very important brochure. I had intended to draw heavily on it, but since we have another speaker who is going to address you, and I do not want to encroach upon his time, I'm not going too much into this except for a few high spots. But you will find copies of it on the table out there for 6 cents apiece. It's one of the most valuable things that you will find, because Willis Stone, the author of the proposed Liberty Amendment, has taken Senator Carl Hayden's brochure, which he titled Senate Document 56, Fallacies and Dangers of the Proposed Liberty Amendment, and categorically he has taken those items and broken them down, and the answer is so beautifully written that you just can't help seeing what it's all about. Now, he has really rendered us a favor. When I went into the state of Alabama to speak for the Liberty Amendment, I had the privilege, actually, the Women for Constitutional Government were responsible for my appearance before the joint session of the legislature. An unfortunate thing had happened, however, the night before. The Speaker of the House had died. And so the House had adjourned, and they came back out of respect to my own time schedule. They came back. The chambers of the Capitol were packed. It was the most magnificent sight you could imagine, people even standing all around. And the response to my presentation of the Liberty Amendment was terrific. I have never enjoyed anything more, and I thought, well, we have it made anyway. But I got back home, and a friend in Alabama sent me a copy of a very nasty letter which had come from the REA. And they were saying that the REA would be killed. It wouldn't, anything of the kind. Actually, what would happen, REA would be paying its own freight. And must the REA be wet nursed from now on? It has been wet nursed through the years. Now, all in the world that the Liberty Amendment does is this. It simply takes the corporate activities out of the hands of government, puts them in the hands of private enterprise, and makes taxpayers out of them instead of the tax moochers, which they now are. And they are moochers. Now, Senator Hayden had sent ahead of me into the Alabama legislature, to every member of the legislature, a copy of these fallacies and dangers of the proposed Liberty Amendment. And it was my pleasure to strike them down one by one. I will not have time to do that today, but as I said, Willis has done such a magnificent job here that if you will get a copy of it, you will certainly profit by reading it. Now, Senator Hayden said this: there has been a concerted effort by a very small but persistent and apparently well-financed group. That was really funny. Willis commented the amount of money collected by the Liberty Amendment Committee last year would run the federal government for exactly 8 seconds, according to their own standards. Well, what does the Liberty Amendment do? It is designed to prevent the federal government from engaging in economic enterprises that are not specifically authorized by the Constitution. Now, do you know what that leaves the federal government? Post offices and post roads, period. Everything else comes back to the states where it belongs, or to the individual. Those 2 sections of the Bill of Rights, 9 and 10. 9 is your People's Amendment. Study it. It's for you. Use it. The 10th reinforces the 9th and sets forth the powers of the states. Now, that is all of the world the Liberty Amendment is to do, except that it is to prevent the use of treaties or executive agreements as a pretext for engaging in such enterprises. Now, you wonder why we worry about that? Well, are you not worried about United Nations? Oh, no. Well, you're going to hear some wonderful speeches on the subject, so I'll not go into that, although that's one of my pet horses that I ride quite frequently. Our people must be informed. This is a real danger. And you know, Article 6 of our Constitution tells us that all laws made, let's get it exactly. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. And that's what's had us bothered. Because this thing that we called a United Nations Charter suddenly turned into a treaty. And here we are, with a treaty that we don't want, but that we can't get rid of. Now, our Women for Constitutional Government have one objective at the national level, and that is get the United States out of United Nations and get the thing off of United States soil. Now, we want to prevent the use of these treaties or executive agreements as a pretext for engaging in such enterprises. How many of you saw this Alan Scott report, which appeared on July 1st? While President Johnson is insistently pressuring Congress to approve intact his $3.5 billion foreign aid budget, Foreign Aid Administrator David Bell is having a lot of trouble trying to recover more than $24 million from a number of countries for what are euphemistically labeled as unauthorized items. These remarkable items include such incongruous foreign aid necessities as sex stimulants, contraceptives, lipstick, eyeshadow, hairspray, household deodorants, plastic soap holders, sun lotions, artificial flowers and imitation jewelry, flavoring extracts, soft drinks, and white sidewall tiles, all paid for by U.S. taxpayers. Total U.S. foreign aid expenditures since the start of this program in 1964 run well over $100 billion to 112 countries. I think that is a typographical error. It does say 1964, but I believe that it has been running since about 1954, if I'm not mistaken. That is the extent of it in a 10-year period, 112 billion. This is approximately 1/3 of the newly enacted $324 billion national debt ceiling. Biggest recipients are France with $9.4 billion and Britain with $8.7 billion. And then he has a breakdown here of all of the countries that are benefiting most. Representative Vernon Thompson, Republican of Wisconsin, who is militantly demanding a tough crackdown on these shocking irregularities, is stressing 2 points. They are constantly increasing while recoveries are diminishing. And then he breaks it down and he shows that in 1960, we had illegal expenditures in the amount of $9,968,000. They recovered almost all of that. But by 61, it had gotten to $15,146,000. They got about half of it back. 1962, $19,853,000. They got $11,641,000 back. 1963, it had climbed from that 9 just 4 years ago, 9 billion, nearly 10,000, billions and thousands. Don't they get you confused, all these big figures? And talking fast. 1963, from 9,968,000, it had climbed to 24,753,000, and they got about half of that back. Now you can see that they really do have a problem, because these people are not going to give it back. Well, Harry Brown says that we are dividing our strength. I have a great deal of respect for Harry Brown. He's the editor of the Freedom magazine. And incidentally, you'll want to pick up copies of this wonderful magazine out on the Committee for Economic Freedom desk. But Harry Brown says we are dissipating our strength because here's a group over here fighting fluoridation, and here's a group over here who's fighting for, well, you just name it. The United Nations, let's take it as an example. And here's somebody else over here who's fighting a specific phase of taxation, or the Social Security. Now, when I had my Social Security fight, George Peck of New York, the late beloved American Way columnist, told me, Mary, please, don't go off the deep end. He said, I've known people who have just lost their sense of balance. When they go into one of these fights, they see nothing, they eat nothing, they sleep nothing, they drink nothing except what that one little battle is. And so I have tried to stay away from Social Security as much as possible, except to tell people of its dangers. When they ask me, I certainly never bite my tongue. We fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. They simply threw the thing back in my face and they said that the thing was a law, that Congress had passed it, it was constitutional, and if we didn't like it, change the Congress. That's what they told us. They didn't even have time to read the brief, which we had prepared at the expense of about $250 for that last final little fling. Now, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to us, as I understand it, because this, to me, is the hub of communism in this country. It is the thing around which this welfare program is revolving, because you see the Social Security funds go into the general treasury, and we have no Social Security fund as such. We have only IOUs, which we must eventually redeem, because they're covered by government bonds. We just don't have a Social Security fund. Another thing, it is not insurance. Now, a horrible thing, a horrible phase of this, and one that I dislike mentioning on Independence Day, is the fact that our Amish farmers in many of our states are very much opposed to Social Security and refuse to pay it. Ruth Clendaniel is here from Indiana, and she can tell you about the fight that these noble people made to keep from paying Social Security. Now, these are very wonderful people. They are primitive in a sense because, as you know, the men wear long whiskers down to their stomachs and big black hats and dark clothes, and the women wear dresses down to the ground. They're wonderful people, though. And these people have nothing to do with mechanical equipment. They don't want tractors on their farms. They have big draft horses with which they work. And do you know the federal government went in and confiscated these draft horses from these Amish farmers and sold them at public auction because they refused to pay Social Security. Now, our colored friends have benefited a great deal from Social Security. And I like to tell the story of the one who, I suppose you saw this in Reader's Digest, it amused me. Someone reminded her that if she married again, that she could not draw the Social Security benefits. And she laughed and she said, Lord, honey, don't you worry. I was done married to Uncle Sam. And she was. And that is our problem today. Too many of our people are married to Uncle Sam, black and white. They like that federal check, and you make no mistake about it. Go into your post office and see the number of federal checks that are coming in. Now, Harry Brown says we are dissipating our strength when we go out on these blind alleys, as he calls them, that we should hew to the line. But let me tell you something. I cannot go all the way with him. I'm never going to lose the main point of the battle, which is the Liberty Amendment. This we must continue to fight for. We must put every particle of the pressure that we have upon our state legislatures to pass this thing. But, let me finish this, please. Let me finish this thought. But we cannot let these little battles go unchallenged. We cannot be taken over. What will there be left to restore if we let them take everything we have? And so we have a double responsibility. We have to fight the little brush fires, but we must never lose sight of the fact that we have one main objective, and that is to get the federal government out of competition with private enterprise and to make them responsible citizens instead of the tax moochers they now are, costing us approximately 12 to 14 billions every year, even though they're interest-free, rent-free, tax-free, every kind of free you can name. These corporations cost us that much money. Now, you know the red tape involved in anything bureaucratic or federal. If we can put these things in private hands, get the picture. Money staying at home, money coming into the federal coffers from it. We can repeal within 3 years the individual income tax. And won't that be the day? No more Form 1040. We cannot truthfully say that we are a free people any longer. I am filled with a sick sense of shame when I realize that although we stand up and sing our national anthem, we are indeed no longer the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's true we have some brave souls, but do we have any free ones? Not even I, who have fought such a strenuous battle to remain free, am really free. None of us is free. You need not kid yourself, my friends. You are scared to death of this infernal revenuer. When he comes to your door, you know that you'd better show him your books, or he can get a court order and demand to see your books. And you know that if you don't let him see it on the first go-round, that he can really make trouble for you. And he will. And he will. And then think of the bill that you have to pay for the snoopers. Those people who stand around and listen to people who say, well, I pulled a fast one on Uncle Sam this time. I did thus and such. And the first thing you know, here's the infernal revenuer looking down your throat and saying, you did thus and such. And you know who got the pay? Maybe one of the people that you think is a very close friend. One of those nice, nasty little people. A federal snooper. Had you ever thought how much it takes just to mail these forms out? The franked postage. Oh, my friends, we have been so blind and so stupid to let this thing continue to grow until today we have this monstrous bureaucracy staring at us. What can we do? We can concentrate on reaching our people in our own states and make this thing come true. Now, there's a provision in the Constitution for amending it. And we want to make it so clear and so positive that never again can the federal government misunderstand us. We tell them we want you to take care of all the legitimate costs of government. It is your duty to take care of the defense of this nation. Under this Liberty Amendment, not one particle of the defense program will be hurt. Although, if you will notice the defense budget, you will find that it has been cut half in two. Why? Because we are not going to foot the bill for barbershops and beauty parlors and dance halls and things of that nature, ice cream parlors even, which they call defense. It's the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard of. It can be done. Now, you have other documents out there that I'd like you to look at. Willis Stone has also gone to the trouble to prepare a list of all of these 707 corporations. It is called Fact Sheet. The first one came out with a complete list of the 707 in 1957. Do you see what a long battle we've been waging on this thing? Now then, a breakdown. Here's the school lunch program, for example. International Cooperation Administration, the Commodity Credit Corporation. And some people will say, well, now, for example, you have listed there the one on patents. Now, that's wrong. That is a government responsibility. You're right, it is a government responsibility. But it is not the government responsibility to get in there and compete with our people when it comes to patents. Now, that is the only thing we're asking the federal government to do, is to stay out of states' and individuals' rights. Let them tend to their knitting, and we will tend to ours. Now, we can do it, and we must do it. This is the battle line to secure passage of the Liberty Amendment in every one of the states that is necessary. Now, it's going to be a hard battle. You know that actually under this thing, we have to, Harry, where's my section? You find it for me. the section on amending the Constitution, and that's section Article 5. We had a long discussion about this when our founding fathers gave it to us. It was changed many times because they felt that if Congress had the right to make the changes themselves, that they would never relinquish any power. Well, we see that. Now, this Liberty Amendment has been before the Congress all these years, but Congress will not put it before the states for the people to ratify. And so we are forced to go through this long and tedious means of securing the necessary number of states with which to do it. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of the Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof. Now, in Mississippi, they made a great big hullabaloo over the fact that we had said in this the same thing that's embodied here in the Constitution. And I'm ashamed to admit to you that my Mississippi people did not know their federal Constitution any better. But they wanted deleted from there the call for a convention. They were afraid of it because they did not, we've never had a convention called. Who would be the delegates? There are many questions we have to think about. If you would call a convention, it could be a very dangerous thing. And so it was all right with me for them to do it, but I thought it reflected a lack of knowledge of the Constitution for the members of our legislature to demand that this be stricken from it. Because here it is in the federal Constitution, and that is the way it has to be done, and that is simply the verbiage used in the Liberty Amendment. Now, you have a job ahead of you. How are you going to do it? What are your tools with which to work? I have shown you some of them. Contact the National Committee for Economic Freedom and let them be your guide. If you will simply subscribe to Freedom Magazine, I think it would give you all the ammunition that you need to work with your state legislatures. But ladies and gentlemen, this is the answer. We can talk until we are blue in the face about any one of these brush fires. But when you get right down to cases, what makes every one of them possible? It's the money. It's the money. Now we must hack at the roots instead of continually chopping at the branches. We must get to the root of this thing, and the root of it is the ability of the federal government to tax our people to the point where they cannot help themselves. They must depend upon the largesse of a federal government. I think the most wonderful words that were ever written, probably by a newspaper man, were written by immortal Henry W. Grady of the Atlanta Constitution. He said long years ago, God love him, and don't you know he turns in his grave thinking of Ralph McGill at his desk. But anyway, he said this: exalt the citizen. As the state is the unit of the government, he is the unit of the state. Teach him that his home is his castle, and his sovereignty rests beneath his hat. Make him self-respecting, self-reliant, and responsible. Let him lean upon the state for nothing his own government can do, and on the government for nothing his state can do. Let him cultivate independence to the point of sacrifice, and learn that humble things with unbartered liberties are better than splendors bought with its price. Friends, we have forgotten that. We have forgotten that every one of these bartered liberties is gone unless we can restore it through the Liberty Amendment. I'm going to close with some of my own words. As many of you are aware, through the years, since 1954, at every Christmas time I have sent greetings to many of the leading patriots of this nation, feeling that they are fighting such a desolate battle, such a lonely battle, many of them standing almost alone. As Robert Montgomery said this morning, I want you to know there's one conservative in Cambridge. That is the case in far too many places. But friends, we are losing our perspective. And so I'm going to close on this note. The same note that I have used every year, using a different poem, of course, through the years, to these wonderful people whom I call keepers of the flame. And I mean keepers of the flame of liberty. For this particular one, I chose key words that you will readily recall. And this is the preamble to my own poor effort at poetry. And I hope Dr. Root will forgive me. That wonderful poet is here. If he will forgive my poor poetry, I will appreciate it. Taxation without representation is tyranny. Give me liberty or give me death. Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they want to have a war, let it begin here. I only regret that I have but one life to give for my country. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of men and women. I have not yet begun to fight. Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. Don't give up the ship. We have met the enemy and they are ours. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light? I shall never surrender nor retreat. Remember the Alamo. There is Jackson standing like a stone wall. Hold the fort, I'm coming. Damn the torpedoes, go ahead. Remember the Maine. You may fire when ready, Gridley. Remember Pearl Harbor. Sighted sub, sank sane.